going to add just one other detail, biographical detail about Dan Poneman. And that is, he's also part of the band, the Coalition of the Willing, but you have to tell what instrument you play. I don't want to get it wrong in terms of your instrument. He's a rock star, in other words, as well.
You wouldn't say a star. I try to play guitar in the workshop.
Which guitar?
Oh, Paula.
Okay, there you go.
You're right. You want to have Paula? And a Fender. That's the other thing.
Okay, there you go. So he is a man of many talents. We are thrilled to have you here today. This is Deputy Secretary here at Luncheon. We have a lot of issues we want to discuss. I want to begin with something that I had the chance to ask earlier keynote speakers. I'm going to ask you. World Affairs Councils, as you're seeing assembled here, all the councils across the United States, they've put forward 6 key issues, national security issues, that they see being addressed and having to be tackled in 2013. And just to put it forward, U.S. economic competitiveness, U.S. education competing globally, Middle East, China, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and U.S. energy policy. And I just want to ask you, starting with that, because your background is a very broad one. It's not only dealing with energy issues, but are there other issues that you think that should be part of this list or that you want to highlight as key for our group to be thinking about?
Paul, let me just start with saying it's a great list that we've already come up with, and I think that anyone who has issues as an American knows the importance that education, innovation are going to have in the future prosperity of our country. Certainly, we've been hearing a lot about that in recent months. I think the interesting thing about the list that your members have already put forward, there are very tight lines of connectivity between and among those that you've already listed, because anybody who's interested in energy has got to be thinking, and I'm seeing Frank Barrett or CSIS, about the Middle East. Anybody who's thinking about the global competitive environment, including in the investments in clean energy, has got to realize what's happening in terms of Europe and China. So I think that it's a good list and robust list. I think from a long-term strategic perspective, it's very clear that we have been focusing 4 years really on energy as something that does have that kind of time to the board. And one thing that I think is now more realized than it has been, but really rather suddenly, is the transformation of our whole fossil fuel economy. And it's just a few years ago that we were still importing 57%. 2008, we were importing 57% of our oil from abroad. We're now at 42%. Our oil production now is well because we're not since 1995. We've become the leading natural gas producer in the world. And anytime you talk about national security and energy, you think of the history of human conflict and how many times they have been waged over energy. I think it's very clear that we've already seen in our global energy economy that the U.S. contribution to it has had a major national security effect. Just one more point on that. What that does, I think, is it has not left us complacent. It has not suggested that we need to do nothing further. But it's given us, I think, a very important measure of security and breathing space to show that intense requirement that we're going to continue to need for fossil fuels can't get, even as we have been investing vigorously in some of the new energy technologies as well. So I think the list that you've got is robust. I think some of these other areas of advanced manufacturing, innovation, education would highlight them.
Well, that's a great point, and I'm sure everyone is gratified. I hope all of you heard that clearly. I think it's an interesting point that you made about these 6 issues, that each and every one of them, there's a connectivity, actually. And actually, I think that's important for all of us, because in the year ahead, all of us are going to be very vigorous in forming different roundtables, different discussions, and looking and analyzing where we're going in each sector. But the connectivity is a very good point. Let me pick up on what you just said about the expansion of oil and gas production in the U.S. Is part of this because we're looking at becoming more energy independent? I know on the national security side of the ledger and the foreign policy side of the ledger. The issue is how we kind of inoculate ourselves, maybe from the ebbs and flows of having to deal with ups and downs with relationships with countries that we don't want to be dependent on. Is that part of it? Is there another part of it? Could you talk about that?
Sure. Well, look, this is something that we've been very attuned to. In fact, every president, going back to President Nixon, has talked about our excessive dependence on imported oil, and there have been ebbs and flows in that. And as you recall, back last March at Georgetown, President Obama spoke very clearly about the need from an national security perspective to move in that direction. Independence, energy independence for any country is a very challenging concept, as interdependent as the world has inevitably become. If you took your economics 101 and learned about the rules of comparative advantage, it's not necessarily the way that the country reaches its highest income. However, looking at diversification of your energy supply in and of itself, even if you can't achieve some magical autarkic wonderful situation where you need to rely on no one else, you can reach some of the security in terms of being protected against capricious or hostile actions by your supplier through diversification. And that's, of course, what we have been doing. And again, in talking about what we're doing in hydrocarbon space, it's not only the fact that we're going to produce increases in oil and gas, but we will remain a very significant source of, we are sometimes called the Saudi Arabia of coal. We've been doing a lot of investment in coal technology, but certainly the renewables. And of course, we have, for the first time in now 30 years, begun the construction of a commercial scale nuclear power plant. We've got 2 projects going down in Vogel in the summer that are further leading to diversification. So call each and every one of these components. The oil and gas side, which obviously in terms of our transportation fleet is still very much related to our petroleum, which I'm going to come back to in a moment. The coal for our stationary power generation. The natural gas revolution with the price plummeting the way we've seen a fuel switching between coal and natural gas. It's really quite stunning. For example, for as many years as, for those of us who are geeky enough to read the American Information Administration, I can plead guilty. For as long as I can, there's another one. The power mix in this country is 50% coal, 20% gas, 20% nuclear, 70% other. So last April, it was 32% coal, 32% gas. And the real driver in that is this unbelievable transformation of our gas markets and the cheap gas prices. So each and every one of these things, Paula, the nuclear, which gives us a level of carbon-free electrons and stationary power, the natural gas revolution, which could transform our transportation fleet as well. Each and every one of these things, I think, strengthens the diversity of our energy economy, which does increase our security, even as the greater self-reliance, because of our now much higher oil production, much higher gas production, provides that added measure of security.
Well, another area that I think you in particular as Deputy Secretary have certainly led on and cared deeply about, and you referenced it already, and that's the importance of innovation in technologies. Bring us up to speed on that. I mean, here, this is a key issue, one of the issues that we've identified. What you see as key priorities in this area in terms of innovation, and maybe some of these sectors.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing because people don't often realize the Department of Energy is actually the largest funder of the federal government of physical sciences. Our budget, on the order of $5 billion a year, goes into science. And it includes, but it does not confine to innovation. It extends to finding some of the deepest secrets of the cosmos. We made major contributions to the search for the Higgs boson. We got halfway there with the tevatron, and then we had lots of contributions to the Large Hadron Collider, which ended up actually pinning down the Higgs boson. In the area of innovation per se, this has been a very high priority, really going back decades. And the traditional role for the Department of Energy has been to invest in those technologies that are so early stage that it's not reasonable to expect the private sector to take that level of risk for that period of time. I'll give you one, I think, small graphic as an telling example. There were two technologies. One of them was called horizontal drilling, and the other was called hydraulic fracturing. Something like that. And there were no, don't correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't. There was no significant industry interest in these technologies in 1978. So for a number of years, beginning in 1978, the Department of Energy invested about $137 million in these technologies. At which point, it matured enough, and you've all read the stories, and Dan Gilbert's book, and he can speak to it in an hour or so, in which we have now gone by a factor of 12, increasing our natural gas. That's one example. We have, on the strength of recommendations of the National Academy of Sciences study, Rising Above the Gathering Storm, we created the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy, ARPA-E, modeled on DARPA, which had been brought forth by the Sputnik revolution back in 1957. ARPA-E was looking for those transformational technologies that could have jump functions, could kink the curve in terms of advancing our energy technology. We've had modest investments in those ARPA-E projects, which have brought in a lot of private capital off the sideline. Let me give you just one example of that. I know we're limited in time. Because if you go out, as I did, to Arkansas, the Fayetteville Shale, and you pull into a CNG station, and you see the gas gallon equivalent is $1.10 for gas gallon equivalent, one notices if you're paying $4 a gallon in Clayton, Virginia, that kind of delta, so do companies. And so there's a huge possibility of thinking about CNG in a more robust transportation sense. What's one of the big problems? You have these heavy tanks, and 3,600 pounds per square inch. So when we've been thinking about CNG vehicles, we have a lot of time been thinking about fleets, so it's in a small area, and it's with a built-in infrastructure. If you could get the walls of those tanks thinner, or if you could put sorbent materials that could take up more molecules of natural gas, so instead of having this big clunking like scuba tank that you have to drive, a lighter, smaller, more manageable thing, all of a sudden you can think of CNG-driven vehicles not as some 2% each of the market, but extended to the light-duty vehicle fleet. That's 60% of the market. That's the kind of thing that we could get innovation like that. Not only would it transform our ability to drive cheaper and cleaner, because of course it's half the greenhouse gas emissions compared to coal, for example, but it could lead to the United States becoming a global leader in the export of these kinds of vehicles, and it could lead to an even further reduction of our dependence on imported oil. So that's the kind of thing that we're looking at, and we're looking at it right across the value sector. Just one other dimension, very, very quickly. In terms of how to get solar competitive, a lot of people could tell you stories, and sometimes stories that roll around the world about the role of feed-in tariffs and subsidies, and what happens when there's a very generous feed-in tariff and then your economy goes sideways. And so it becomes quite expensive. The smarter move, we think, is what the Secretary proposed, is sunshine, to get the levelized cost of electricity from solar down to 5 or 6 cents, by really driving down the cost of the inverters, the assembly, the actual panels, and you do that through a lot of manufacturing advancement and a lot of innovation. If we can make those kinds of progress in these kinds of sectors, there's just a tremendous upside for the country.
Let me also take that and maybe bring it down to a local level in terms of the question of investment in energy efficiency and the advancement of energy efficiency. And I think because, looking across the room, and we have people all across the United States here, just about every single state represented, there are a lot of states that are investing themselves in urban planning and looking at energy efficiency, trying to cut costs in the planning stages at the outset. I remember when I was in government going out to Livermore labs and seeing some of the advancements, whether it's in terms of building materials, it's in terms of the windows used, you name it. I mean, there's some very striking changes. Talk a bit about where things are in that sense and some of the priorities that you're seeing, and how you also work with the local authorities.
Well, this is actually a hugely important part of our agenda, Paula. And if you think, for example, 40% of our energy consumption is in buildings, 40% of our greenhouse source of improvement in our energy security and our energy economy, this is what we call a very lucrative area for investment. And we, of course, have this Better Buildings Initiative where we're bringing in a lot of companies and hospitals and universities to work with us and trying to put some of these innovations in place. In fact, what we're finding is, what we have found is that although it is often assumed that energy efficiency is a very expensive thing, that when you actually do the analysis of how to bring, not power, but how to bring energy solutions to people, that the cheapest investment with the highest payoff is in terms of efficiency, just those very areas you're talking about. How are we with localities? One of the best parts of this job, as you said, I come very much out of the national security arena. One of the best parts of this job is I have gone around this country, Arkansas, Minnesota, Iowa, all over the place, and we meet every place we go with a round table of community leaders, business people, construction people, and we take assiduous notes on what they're finding in terms of solutions that we don't know about, and frankly, where we might be getting in their way with red tape and bureaucracy. So this is one of these things you really have to block and tackle. We're trying to do everything we can at a national level to be efficient in getting out the technology. We've taken a lot of steps in terms of the great amount of intellectual property that's been developed in our national labs over the years. And we've spun that out, and we're trying to find better ways, with less red tape, to get people to get into their hands those technologies. Let me just add one other thing. There is an executive order that was signed on sustainability, 13514, I think. And under this, we are committed to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 28% by 2020. And what we have done is we have talked to our lab directors. And these are people who are, again, literally dealing with sometimes cosmic issues. Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, new National Renewable and Energy Laboratory in Denver, many others, Brookhaven, Argonne, all over this country. And we said, we want you to look at energy efficiency in your buildings, just like you look at the surety of a nuclear stockpile. We need you to bring the same level of intellectual intensity and drive and passion to those challenges that you bring to what might normally be considered a mission. Because really, this is part of the mission. Because we can't just walk along. We have to talk to them. And I know I said one more thing, but one more thing. We have got a great partnership. We signed a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Defense. They have over 300,000 buildings. What a great laboratory to try out energy efficiency and at scale. So we can find, at that kind of scale, market-based mechanisms, because that's what we need, because this is the huge predominant majority of ownership is in the private sector. But to have the opportunity to work with the Pentagon on a test bed like that, 10 times the amount of square foot under roof that the General Services Administration has, that has been also a very lucrative area for us to try to drive some kind of local solutions in a manner that we can scale nationally.
Why does energy security, why does it matter as a national security issue? And are we working with countries across the globe in support of energy security?
We're working intensively. It matters because, first and foremost, we have to feel comfortable in our homes, comfortable within our own borders, comfortable that we can be the masters of our own fate, to the extent that through access to energy, we can bring that into our own two hands of control as a nation. We are obviously better off, and don't take my word for it. Look at every country that doesn't have it and how they react, and you can see what I'm talking about. This is something that does require intensive international cooperation, and so we look forward to very important partnerships with the largest energy economies in the world, with China, with India. We have had intense engagement with our partners in the Middle East, and we'll bring this home in a very sharp way. As we were trying to deal, for example, last year with 1.3 million barrels of oil from Libya coming off the market as that political transition was unfolding, we worked very closely with the International Energy Forum and with the producing nations throughout the world, but particularly in the Middle East, to make sure that all of us didn't end up losing GDP, losing jobs because of this loss of energy supply. And so I'm confident that the kind of cooperation we've had whether it's with the Clean Energy Ministerials, where we have all kinds of initiatives on smart grid and appliance standards and so forth, or whether it's with more of our traditional partners in Europe or in the Middle East, this is going to continue to be a very important part of our energy security agenda.
I want to pick out a topic that I don't think most of us in this audience, and myself included, really were aware of. Is the role of the Department of Energy in dealing with hurricane-related issues. We're very interested in hearing about that.
Well, I must tell you, Paula, there are certain things that were surprising me in this job, and that was one of them. So I too was surprised. So last May, a number of people gathered to brief President Obama as we were just getting ready to look into the upcoming hurricane season. And Secretary Napolitano, Mr. Fugate of FEMA, and we brought some utilities in as well. It turns out that we have a very important role under our overall effort to protect the critical infrastructure of this nation to protect against these kinds of episodes. In this particular episode over the last couple of weeks with the horrible, tragic impact of Hurricane Sandy, we knew it was coming, and we began immediately, because we could anticipate, to see what we could do, the responsibilities entrusted under our existing rules and regulations of the Department of Energy, to see that power restoration went forward as quickly as possible. The President made very, very clear early on that after the personal safety and health considerations for the adversely affected individuals in this horrible storm, that power restoration was at the top of our agenda. So you may have seen, we airlifted, we worked very closely with the Pentagon, we flew C-17s and C-5s full of bucket trucks. The scale of the destruction in the East was extraordinary. We tapped all of our power marketing administrations, Honorable Western Area Power Administration. What do you have by way of alignment? What do you have by way of crews? We've also worked to help companies in terms of restoration of the fueling infrastructure, because there was tremendous damage up and down New York Harbor where so much oil flows through, and in midstream and the downstream. So whether it's having the Coast Guard work with us in terms of going to the terminals and finding out if there's wreckage around their docks, if they're bringing in oil, whether it's us working with the electrical utility, with whom we've been having conference calls daily to say, do you have what you need? Do you have the cots to have your linemen sleep at night? Do you have the linemen to tree trims that need to bring power back? Do you have the generators that you might need to run a gas station that's got plenty of gas in the tanks below but can't get it pumped out to its customers? We have been literally working around the clock for the last couple of weeks on that.
And another part of your portfolio, because it's massive, is the proliferation, non-proliferation side, because there's a component within the Department of Energy structure that deals with that. Earlier this morning, and then the panel before was very focused on questions of proliferation. Give us a sense of how you are focused on that, especially with the concern about Iran these days.
Paula, this has been a traditional area of interest and expertise. Of course, as most people here know, but is not universally known, really the core of the Department of Energy is what used to be known as the Atomic Energy Commission. And so if you were looking for technical expertise, who understands nuclear weapons best, those who have the custodianship of our existing deterrent are in our national labs under the authority of the U.S. Department of Energy. And so while we are not the lead diplomats, when the diplomats need to know what actually they need to worry about, we all get together and we discuss these things. There's been no subject about which we've been more concerned, as you just mentioned in the last few years, than Iran. And we have assiduously worked with our partner agencies in trying to find solutions that could provide some kind of a pathway for Iran to come back into compliance with its international non-proliferation obligations in a manner that could protect us from the horrible consequences that could flow from proliferation in that country. That's had a number of dimensions, which is two worth mentioning. One, when the last round of sanctions was passed by the U.S. Congress under the National Defense Authorization Act at the end of the year, the Department of Energy worked very, very closely, continues to work closely with the Department of State and others to make sure that the impact of those sanctions was felt by Iran and not by the rest of us. But there is a chance that the situation could have evolved in such a way that people around were able to evade the sanctions and get their oil to market, but that the anxiety produced by the overall tension in the region spiked the prices. Iran could end up doing better. But I'm very happy to say that I think that these sanctions have in fact turned out to be crippling on Iran, and it's really because of a lot of international cooperation, but certainly cooperation here among different parts of the government to make sure that A, we kept the oil flowing from producing countries, and B, that we did everything we could to cooperate so that Iran did not have successful evasions. And then the other side of the equation, Paula, in terms of watching the development of the centrifuges in Iran, working with the International Atomic Energy Agency to be very clear and continuing to ask those questions that they need to come clean on in terms of coming back into compliance with their international obligations. There too, to have the kind of technical knowledge of people in our national labs and departments about the technologies that are related to nuclear production basically gives us the ability to understand what Iran is really up to and what the implications of that are.
Let me say, it's the time that we said we got to get you out of here because he's got a meeting at the White House. But before, 30 seconds, this group, will be private sector. And one of the strengths, I think, always in policy is public-private partnerships. In the areas and the issues that you deal with, and particularly because energy security and energy is one of the areas we identified, what advice would you have for all of us here as we really develop this issue in our panels and fora into 2013?
I think it's actually impossible to exaggerate the importance of public-private partnership. To take the broad energy picture, Paula, the vast majority of the assets out there, the vast majority of investor-owned utilities, transmission lines, distribution networks, obviously the liquid fuel sector is in private hands. So we are very conscious of what our role is. Our role is to try to distill policy that comes from the president in a way that supports the ability of our private sector to continue to innovate, to continue to provide the energy solutions that have already brought the country to the extraordinary level that it has become. With each passing day that we deal with very challenging issues, whether it's figuring out how to build a smart grid that's as smart as the appliances that are now going at one end and the intermittent power sources that are feeding at the other end, whether it's, as you were talking about, finding a form of window glazing that can save 40% of your investment in a particular building. All of this is a place where we can do certain things. We can help by providing fuel efficiency standards, which by doubling those to 54.45 miles a gallon are going to create a tremendous opportunity. It was done cooperatively with the private sector. It has great opportunities in some of these areas of spinning off the intellectual property that I talked about, whether it's in terms of glazings and different kinds of collectors for solar panels, or whatever it is. We see our role as helping in terms of setting regulatory clarity where it makes sense, in terms of providing investments in very early stage of technology where private sector cannot be expected, but there might be a big payoff, and to basically create a stable environment in which our companies can prosper, because at the end of the day, when they prosper and make tremendous strides in their own energy efficiency, the whole nation benefits.
Secretary Poneman, thank you for coming today and sharing your time.